Hi, my loves. Welcome to another episode inside Kinship. This is a space where I deep dive into the relationship dynamics that dog moms share with their dogs. But today, I actually want to talk about a pattern that I have found that many women, including myself, encounter in marriage. A pattern that is actually really subtle, it's very persistent, and it's quite freaking exhausting. And that pattern is this tendency that some of us have to overgive when we feel bad for our partners. Now, before I start, I just want to be super clear that this is not about blaming your partner. This is not about pointing fingers. It's not to, bash your husband or do husband bashing in general. It's really just about, I think, noticing patterns that we often fall into unconsciously, right? And it's about noticing what is actually happening for us when those patterns come up and what happens for us when we continue to be in those patterns repeatedly. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really learn how to reclaim our own sense of self preservation while still showing empathy and care. So, this episode is really for women who, have been committed to doing this kind of really deep inner work, whether that is doing the work emotionally, whether that's doing the work in their relationships, whether that's, moving through social cultural expectations and scripts. This is really about women who understand context, who understand trauma, who understand, power dynamics, who understand, the politics of care, right? For women who have already been so deeply empathetic and reflective, but still sometimes lose themselves in the process of holding space for their partners. And this is not because there is something wrong with you or me for doing that. It doesn't mean that, we have a problem that we've got to like fix and eliminate from the root. It's not that. It's just that this pattern of overgiving is also a survival pattern that has been so deeply kind of encoded into our bodies and nervous systems that different situations kind of bring those up. And this is really just about inviting us to meet those patterns and potentially initiate some kind of an inquiry into what's actually going on there for us. So, if you've ever been in a situation where you have wanted to share something, deeply with your partner, or you've even wanted to, for example, give them like feedback on something, but you have kept quiet because they've been like super stressed and overwhelmed, and, it feels like, oh my God, their whole world is coming crashing down, then this episode is for you. If you have, kind of held yourself back or restrained yourself from quote unquote giving it back to your husband when they have snapped at you or made, a completely uncalled comment, right? And you have excused that because you can see how overwhelmed they are in that moment or how dysregulated or triggered they've become. This episode is for you. And if you've also found yourself in situations when you have just found that your husband's been emotionally unavailable, whether that's been, for a couple of days or for a certain period of time, and you have felt that that's okay, I'm just going to take on more load and everything's going to be okay, then this episode is definitely for you. Because in this episode, again, I want to call that out. None of this is wrong. None of this is, talking about, oh my God, like, why are you tolerating this kind of behavior? It is absolutely not coming from that judgmental space, right? But I think this episode is really about inviting us to kind of just explore how sometimes empathy can also become self erasure, right? And sometimes we might actually find ourselves in very similar patterns, even with our dogs, in our relationship with them, right? And maybe again, an opportunity for us to learn, what is an alternative way to do that without kind of risking this erasure of our identity and our needs. And, I have personally found that just kind of observing our dogs is a great model of doing that. It's so simple and it's such a great model, and not really as a cute metaphor and as like a, you know, superficial, you know, fluffy piece of information, but really genuinely as really turning to them as a guide for that kind of emotional presence and self-preservation, because I think our dogs really do it amazingly. So that is pretty much what we're going to explore in today's episode. And of course, at any point in time, if something really like, stands out to you, make a note of it. But I think in general, the invitation through this conversation is, I think, for you to notice like what's coming up for you in your body as you consume this content. I think to notice, points where you feel like the tingles of possibility of trying something new, of showing up differently in your relationship, or, where you feel just very so deeply fucking seen and, acknowledged, or even moments when you find yourself feeling resistance or, pushback or contractions coming up in your body. So I think the invitation really is to just kind of like really deeply listen and to notice the sensations in your body, because, those are always amazing signals to kind of ground us into what we're actually feeling at a sensational level, beyond what we think we should be feeling. So that's my invitation to you as we kind of move through this episode. So I want to start with something that I actually like really grapple with. And this is something that's very recent because, my husband and I have just been going through like a period of aliveness and disconnection for a while. And, I have found myself back in the same loop of conversations that I was in about 2 years ago. And I just feel so incredibly frustrated that, I'm back to like square one. And I think I found myself also like really, judging myself and being really like hard on myself, because I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm doing the work. I am showing up in therapy. I'm showing up in different spaces. I'm committing to, really recognizing my patterns and kind of, stepping out of patterns that no longer serve me. And yet I find myself in this situation again and again and again where, I end up like really overgiving at the cost of like my own needs. And so I kind of wanted to start by setting the context of, I think, like why this particular pattern again hits women who have done the work, right? And I think what's really important to start with is, for those of us who are committed to that inner discovery and inner work, approach marriage with a very deep sense of awareness, right? And this is an awareness that I think a lot of, our mothers, our grandmothers, a lot of women, again, within our own age groups or sometimes even older to us, may not have necessarily walked into marriage with, but some of us have, right? So we've read, we've reflected, we've journaled, we've been in, spaces like therapy or alternative, or other modalities that have kind of really invited us to think about what is our backstory, right? And how is that shaping us to be the person that we are? And how is that shaping our response to different situations and triggers and relationships? And so, in general, I think we've been really invested in understanding behavior and relational dynamics. And so when our partners struggle, whether that is emotionally, professionally, or socially, we don't just see the struggle, but we see the backstory, right? We notice the dysregulation. We don't see just like, oh, you're having a bad day at work. We're seeing, you know, a nervous system that is struggling, that is really struggling to function, right? We see the trauma, we see the unmet needs, right? And I think that seeing that backstory, again, is a double-edged sword, very honestly. I think that's what I've kind of concluded, because I think seeing that backstory, and I'm going to give, like, in my relationship, for example, seeing that backstory allows me to so deeply care for my husband and to offer him a tenderness and a sense of possibility that, he may not have necessarily anchored into, right? But I also think that that backstory kind of makes it easy to excuse certain kinds of behaviors, or, get him off the hook a little bit more than often, or cut him more slack, cut him slack very often, makes it easy to kind of constantly like accommodate and constantly wait for something to shift, right? And I have found myself, pretty much going through like this self-talk. And I think that so many other women experience this as well, which is, I'm just going to wait for a better time to speak up. Right now doesn't feel like a good time to talk about XYZ, right? And it could be something about, a disconnection between, your partner and you. It could be about something else that you're carrying altogether. It could be, it could have nothing to do with your partner, and it could have everything to do with something that you have been moving through emotionally or spiritually or, existentially. I think the self-talk where you're constantly kind of explaining that they didn't really mean it, you, your partner said something or behaved in a certain way, um, happened to say something in a fit of rage, perhaps, that they didn't really mean. And I think the other self-talk, which I think is a very, very debilitating one, which again, I have found myself in so often. And I think I spent, the first, I would say about like 2 years of my marriage, very much immersed in this, is if I just support them more, they're going to feel better and the relationship will survive. Right? And I think that, and I think what comes up for me, like every time that I talk about this and every time I have a conversation about this, is it's very easy to kind of move into like binary spaces, right? Where you're like, oh my God, like empathy is a problem. You need to stop being so empathetic and you need to give the tough love. And it's so interesting that so much of the language is very similar to how, you know, we receive language about how we need to build relationship with our dogs, right? And the problem isn't empathy, right? The problem is that this empathy exists without boundaries, that this empathy comes at the cost of self-preservation. It comes at the cost of, abandoning your own needs and abandoning your own self. And I think that, again, I think there are situations in marriages when obviously you're kind of like negotiating and compromising, and there are times when you've got to let go of, some of the things, and your partner lets go of some of the other things, let goes of some of the other things, and I think that push and pull happens. But again, what I want to anchor this is in, are you noticing a pattern? Like, are you stuck in the same loop again and again? Right? Are the same feelings? Is the same pattern showing up for you again and again and again? Because that's really where this episode is about, right? Like that's really where this episode is coming from, where it's like you're stuck in a pattern. The same behaviors or the same feelings are showing up for you again and again and again, right? And I think that is really where, this is asking of us to really rethink our understanding of empathy, our understanding of boundaries in context to empathy as well, right? because I think the truth that I know, and I'm going to be really honest with my husband, particularly, I have gotten much better at this though, but I still have a long way to go. The truth that I know, and that, I obviously like coach so many dog moms on as well, is the fact that overgiving, right? Like overextending yourself isn't about being nice or being emotional or being deeply attached to your dog or to your husband. It is a survival strategy. It is what you have learned to preserve connection, right? It is what you have learned to avoid conflict. It is what you have learned to prevent someone you're in relationship with feeling uncomfortable. Because that is how you can preserve connection. That is how you have learned that relationships stay. That is how you have learned that your own needs, your voices, your boundaries are secondary. What is primary is to maintain peace. So, a good relationship, a successful relationship, a healthy, a stable relationship is one that is peaceful. And the way that it is peaceful is through your capacity to overgive, overstretch, and overextend yourself. But over time, and I'm sure those of you who are listening to this resonate with this 100%, over time, this pattern becomes so fucking unsustainable. It leads to resentment. It leads to emotional fatigue. It leads to just feeling invisible in your relationship. And I just want to share like a deeply vulnerable example here. So a couple of years ago, I want to say about maybe like 3 years ago, I had I had hit a point in my marriage where I genuinely felt like I was fucking, like I couldn't live with this man anymore. And it was just so hard because he is so freaking amazing. He is kind and he's supportive and he is loving and he's my best friend. And we are just, we're so freaking compatible. And, you know, I mean, he's the most important person in my life. And something that I always felt was like, I want to be in relationship with you. I just don't want to be married to you. And it's interesting, right? Like that's the thing that came up for me. And the reason why I reached that point very honestly was because the I was at the end of my patience, and I was at the end of like, by then, like I had just been giving and giving and giving and giving. It was just like boundaryless fucking empathy and boundaryless fucking support and understanding. And it built up so much resentment inside me. It built up so much exhaustion inside me. It built up so much rage inside me. And I remember, telling my therapist that it is so fucking hard being in a relationship with someone you love and feeling alone in that relationship. And that was my experience. And I think that's a sentiment that I think a lot of women resonate with. And I think it's hard because self-preservation is, seen and described as like selfishness. It's described as being really like self-centered. Because again, women and wives in particular, that role, really does kind of ask of you to like basically abandon your individual identity, energy, and voice and just kind of like cater to, everyone else's needs. And that kind of patriarchal thinking, by the way, still runs everywhere. I mean, I am as my parents and my in-laws, they're as liberal and progressive and as they can be. They're great examples of how much I think flexibility they have kind of really internalized, and how adaptable they've become on so many different fronts. But let's be real about this, right? That kind of patriarchal thinking runs fucking deep. And so many of us move through that without even consciously realizing it, right? And so even in so-called really modern progressive households, there continues to be a lot of these expectations of women and of wives and of daughters-in-law and all of that, right? um and so I think that and I think that it is hard to break out of that. I think it feels really hard to break out of that, because the scripts coming to us at women is always about, don't be selfish, don't take up too much space, be grateful for what you have, or it's a phase, everybody goes through it, it's fine. And I think very few women as well, very honestly, realize the depths of that resentment and that fatigue and that sense of loneliness of being in a relationship, that sense of invisibility of being in a relationship where your pattern of overgiving is constantly playing out. And again, it's coming, from the best of your intention, and with all of your interests, all of, well-intentioned interests, but it's just not landing the way that you would like for it to, right? um and so I mean, I thought I'll share a few like common, you know marriage scenarios, like real life examples. I think this has happened with me. I think all of these examples have happened with me, and then some of them I'm naming from conversations that I've had with, like, some of my one-on-one clients as well. And so something that I have been recently struggling with is, your part, like your husband is, my husband's been not yours, mine, but my husband's been like really overwhelmed with work. He's been really stressed out. He's been really like struggling with a few like interpersonal issues. And it's been going on for the last 3 months. And for the last 3 months, he has essentially been, quite checked out, really distracted, very, very much emotionally absent. And my overgiving response has like fully kicked in, right? And which is really about, okay, I'm going to stay quiet. I'm not going to bring up my feelings. My husband's barely holding it together. I have so many other spaces to kind of move through my feelings. And you know what the cost is? My loneliness and frustration has accumulated so fucking silently, but so insidiously, that now I am feeling disconnected from my husband, right? And the rage is building up. And I am ready to like freaking lose my shit, right? Um, and so that's one example, right? I think another example could be, again, your partner snaps at you or withdraws, right? Oh my God, this is so triggering for me. This idea of like this emotional withdrawal that happens. But anyway, your partner snaps or withdraws or dismisses your needs, right? And again, I want to call it out. They're not doing it from a place to be an ass to you, right? They're not doing it with malicious intent. They are also pretty much operating from their own survival patterns, right? And again, that's what makes it so freaking hard, because, we can see that, right? We can see that for most part, we can say that this is not a bad human being. This is not a toxic, abusive person. This is someone who is also in survival mode, and so much of this response is coming from their survival pattern, right? And so your overgiving response in that situation is to say they didn't mean it, right? They are stressed, they are dysregulated, they're in survival mode right now, right? But the thing that we fail to acknowledge is that the impact of that behavior still lands. You explaining that behavior in your head, even if it is a right explanation, even if it is an accurate representation of what's happening, does not soften the blow. And that unaddressed impact accumulates over a period of time, right? Another really common example that I see, and this is very, very true for so many dog moms that I work with, is you are essentially the planner in the relationship. You're the fixer and the planner. So you're managing household logistics. You are, checking in on the emotional temperature. You are taking care of your family's needs. You are pretty much the primary caregiver for your dog. You are keeping track of relational nuances and dynamics and the politics between your mother-in-law and X person and Y person. And the emotional labor of all of this feels so fucking unequal, right? And your overgiving response is that, oh, my husband's not wired that way, right? I can handle it because of course I can handle it. I am superhuman and I can figure all of this out. My husband can't handle it, right? Because they're just not wired that way. Like something that I've learned, like something that I've heard so much, it's crazy. Something that I've heard so much from so many like married women, and some of them are slightly older to me. So it, is the fact that, oh, men can just not multitask. They're just not good at multitasking. Like women are great at multitasking, so they can handle multiple things altogether, but men can't, right? And that is such a load of crap. I mean, it just is, right? And again, we see that cost playing out, which is your nervous system bears the load while your partner remains under engaged, right? Your partner stays completely removed from all of this labor that is burdening your own system, right? Another example, another scenario that I find so often playing out, and again, I have fallen into this trap so many freaking times. Is maybe your partner has had a difficult childhood, maybe your partner carries a lot of trauma from their past, maybe you can see that your partner has unresolved issues, your partner has a lot of unmet needs, right? Your overgiving response is they've been through so much and I need to be patient, even if it costs me. Right? And it's so interesting that as I'm saying this, I'm just like, but friend, you also have a past, right? You have also potentially been through something really hard. You're also potentially carrying baggage from your past. And we're not sitting and comparing, right? How who has had the more challenging past, but everybody has baggage and everybody has issues and everybody has unresolved issues, right? But you end up disregarding your history, your context, and make space for only your partner's context. And what happens as a result of that is that your present needs are consistently deferred for their past and for their history. That becomes an explanation for everything, for your entire relational dynamic, for the way that your relationship is. That's a lot. That's a lot. And that feels, I mean, I can only speak from my experience. I think that can feel extremely strained and tight, and it can feel like there is no space, or there is very limited, or there is very custom made space for you to be fully alive and empowered and confident and bright and magnetic and radiant, right? Because you're spending so much of your time just existing in this kind of like survival mode, as opposed to, for the lack of a better word, like just really freaking thriving, right? And I think this is such a key moment when we can actually turn to our dogs and see what they have to teach us about emotional presence, right? And I think that, again, with the dog moms that I work, because they're so deeply feeling, they're so sensitive, they are, they care so freaking deeply, right? We can all align on the fact that dogs are just very deeply emotionally attuned. I mean, it's a fact, right? They sense distress, they sense fear, they sense sadness, they sense anxiety. And so when someone is struggling, and this might have happened for you as well, your dog might come and sit nearby, your dog might stay calm, your dog's presence might just offer, that kind of quiet companionship that is needed in the moment. But you know what a dog doesn't do? A dog doesn't abandon themselves to fix someone else's problem. A dog doesn't stop eating or moving when someone is uncomfortable. A dog doesn't lose their sense of boundaries. I have had so many moments when, and this is actually with Luchi, my first dog. She was very particular about like her meal timings, and if you didn't give her food at the time that she was asking for food, like she would start whining and like relentless whining. And I have had so many moments when I am sitting in front of her and bawling my eyes out, like really vulnerable, really upset, like just really crying, weeping like a child. And it has coincided with her mealtime. And she has made eye contact with me, and she has just whined for food. And I have literally had to be like, what the fuck? I am crying and you want food. And I have had to wipe my tears and snap out of it and give her her meal. Right. And I know so many dog moms relate with this example, because I will hear on and off that, oh my god, like my dog like can see me cry, but he doesn't, he or she doesn't even like come to me, or is just like sitting there, or continues to kind of ask what they need at whatever time they need. And it can feel like they're disconnected from you. And I think that the reason why it feels like they're disconnected from you, or that they don't care about you, is because you have a tendency to overgive. You have a tendency to, show up for someone else at the cost of your own self. And so what our dogs are actually doing in that moment is are what they're doing is communicating without words. They're saying, I see you, I acknowledge you, but I also remain myself. I also remain true to my needs. I also remain true to my boundaries. So, yes, clearly you're having a hard time, but that does not give you permission to stifle my space, to violate my space, or to hold me in a way that feels stifling or non consensual. That is empathy with self preservation. That is compassion without collapse. If you are loving this idea of dogs as mirrors and guides, I want to invite you to Untamed, my new group coaching container. Untamed is for dog moms who are married and ready to step fully into aliveness and empowerment in their marriages. Together, we honor your dogs as mirrors and guides to uncover patterns, reconnect with your voice, and reclaim your energy without sacrificing empathy or love. If you have been feeling stuck in overgiving or like you're losing yourself while caring deeply for your partner, this is the space to awaken your power, strengthen your boundaries, and experience connection that feels alive and reciprocal. You can find all the details about Untamed in my show notes. And now, back to the episode. So, how do we translate this dog wisdom into marriage? And I'm going to give you a couple of situations, right? So, instead of, I understand why you're like this, so I'm just going to swallow my needs at the moment, which is what an overgiving response would usually do. What if we were to say, I understand what you're going through, and I still need to express my experience. Okay, I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to invite you to stay with this. Again, this is a great point in time to notice any sensations that are coming up. We're looking for any moments, any glimmers of expansion, softening in your body. As I say this, we're looking for any contraction, tightness, tension that's coming up. Right? Those are all signals that your body is giving you about what feels comfortable to hold in your nervous system and what doesn't. And it's okay if you're experiencing both expansiveness as well as contraction in your body. Okay, let's move to another situation. Instead of constantly telling yourself, now doesn't feel like the right time to share something, to say something, what if you were to try saying, there may never be a perfect time, but my experience still matters. My reality is still valid. Yeah. Again, inviting you to notice any expansion, any contraction. The last one. Instead of saying or believing that if you push, you will make it worse, what if you were to tell yourself, silence or being silent is also a choice that comes at my own expense, that comes at the cost of my own needs. Again, just inviting you to notice any expansion, any contraction in your body. And we're only noticing, we're not doing anything about it. And if this moment is feeling really tense, really tight, just inviting you to take a few deep breaths and exhale really loudly. At this point, feel free to stretch, move around, shake it off a little bit. And just inviting you to hold two realities together at this point. Self-preservation doesn't mean that you're withdrawing love or that you're severing connection. It means that you are staying connected with yourself while also staying connected with your partner. And I think it's absolutely legit, it's absolutely valid that while you might understand that conceptually and intellectually, that's not how it feels like in your body. That in your body, it feels like any act of self preservation feels like you're actually severing connection, feels like you're actually breaking the relationship, feels like you're causing problems in the relationship. Both these realities can be true for you. And both of them are an invitation for you to just go deeper into what's actually happening, what's actually coming up, right? To go deeper into what are the different stories that have shaped this reality. And what is the possibility? What is the reality that you want to live in today? What is the reality and vision that you want to bring alive today for you, for your partner, for your marriage? That's the little bit of work that we do inside Untamed. Just FYI. And so I think that, even for dog moms, for women like us who, have done the work and continue to do the work, patterns of unequal emotional labor can very easily sneak in because they're so insidiously encoded into our freaking nervous system and into our contexts in so many ways. And so I think just like really taking the time to ask yourself, who is the one who is adapting more? Who is carrying most of the emotional labor? Who is translating and cushioning impact for the other? If empathy flows only one way, it's not intimacy, it's imbalance. And living in relationships with a sense of imbalance, honestly, is unsustainable. I feel like it's a ticking time bomb. And so you end up kind of like, wanting to course correct along the way because we're not wired to live in imbalance. We want to feel settled and safe, and at a very physiological level as well, right? We want to be in a state of homeostasis. And so we've been told repeatedly that caring deeply means that you stop thinking about yourself and that you pretty much erase your own unique identity and energy and voice. But that is not really what care means. And that's a very contorted definition of care that we've been kind of handed. Caring deeply does not require self erasure. Being aware of your husband's backstory does not require silence. It's not an excuse. It's not a layer that we have to necessarily use when in interaction with them. And love, the love that your partner and you share, does not require you to sacrifice your own needs at all. You can hold space for your partner. You can understand and empathize and be deeply supportive for them without giving up your own voice, without giving up your own boundaries, without giving up your emotional energy. And you are 100% allowed to tend to yourself and choose not to tend your relationship. Choose not to tend to your relationship at certain points in time. Because if all of your energy and effort has been towards just trying to overgive in your relationship, what are you really giving yourself? And so this is that moment when you can choose to do this slightly differently, and giving yourself, taking care of yourself, tending to yourself in no way in form means that you don't give a fuck about your marriage. Absolutely not. You can tend to yourself while not overgiving in your marriage. That can be a reality. That is possible. And so I want to kind of like close this episode a little bit with just a very simple self-preservation exercise that could be really helpful. So it's a simple check that you can use before, you start kind of making space for your partner's needs and, accommodating their behaviors. And to really just literally, right, like take a few seconds to think about and reflect internally. Am I doing this from choice or am I doing this from fear? Because if you're doing this from choice, in that moment, you, my love, are exercising fucking agency. And yes, let's celebrate that 100%. But if you're doing it from fear, it's just asking you to build that awareness. And it's just asking you to potentially clarify for yourself as well. Right? It's asking you to just interrupt that default pattern of overgiving and saying, hey, I'm actually doing this from a place of fear and I want to acknowledge that. And that too can be really powerful in that moment. And so we can 100% fucking acknowledge that as well. Right? The second thing that I would think about is what would self-preservation look like here? So something that I have been practicing is every time my husband and I end up talking and he just wants to go on and on and on about what's going on for him at work, without so much as like checking in with me or asking about my day or asking about some of the stuff that I have been moving through. Self-preservation for me looks like saying, hey, I'm going to draw a boundary. Each of us gets maybe a few minutes to update each other about what's happening and deeply connect with the conversation, but this cannot be a one-way conversation. And if you'd like for me to only listen to it, then we're going to have to figure out another time to do that, because right now I also want to share. And I also want to kind of get your perspective on XYZ things. That is what self-preservation could look like for me in that particular context. Right? And then the third question, which I think is really, really powerful, is if I don't say this now, when am I going to actually say it? And that's a really fucking hard-hitting question. So just inviting you to reflect, journal, speak your truth gently, because this is not about getting it perfect, right? It's just really about showing up honestly, transparently with what is also going on for you in your body, what is also going on for you in your heart, and not abandoning that for the sake of the other. To know that your relationship has space to accommodate both. And the example that I want to give is, this is actually it's a really interesting example. And I think this is something that my husband used to tell me when, I had kind of like started learning how to drive. And I would kind of, in the initial days, I would end up like driving on some of these narrow roads as well. And I would 100% freeze when like another car was coming towards me. And my husband, who was at that time my boyfriend, would tell me that, there is always going to be space for two cars to move up and down like this on a road like this. Right? So you might have to squeeze tight a little bit. You might have to pause and let the other car pass. But there will always be space. And so don't freeze up. Don't feel like you need to backtrack. Don't feel like, you need to kind of, oh my God, you can't do anything. There will always be space. And you can always like figure it out with the other person as well. right? How much to move up, how much to go back. You can figure it out, but there is always space. And I think that is so true for marriage as well. That there is always space for both of you to be going through shit together and for both of you to be talking about it together. And it feels like that there isn't. It feels like every person gets their own time, but that's just not true. And we can create that reality. We can create that possibility in our marriage as well. Right? Because you can be compassionate. You can be really trauma informed. You can be emotionally fucking aware. You can be married and you can be deeply loving and caring and sentimental and still refuse to overgive at the cost of yourself. Very much like our incredible dogs, we can stay emotionally present without losing our footing. We can acknowledge what our partners are going through and remain loyal to our own inner lives. Because that, my love, is not selfish. That's living with dignity and aliveness and honesty.